You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app. Or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
Joined now by Kaylee Lines. Shawn Fain didn't wait. He announced it shortly after 10 that they're expanding strikes against GM and Stellantis. Ford must be feeling sort of proud today, although they're still striking Ford, just not expanding the strike against Ford.
Just status quo for Ford, because some progress in talks has been made there, where it hasn't been made in GM and Stellantis' case, which is why you're seeing this expansion. And we're starting to get some headlines from the automakers themselves in response to this, Joe. GM just put out a statement, it seems, saying UAW leadership is manipulating the bargaining process, that the strike escalation by leadership is unnecessary, though GM says they will continue to bargain with the union to reach a pact. Then Stellantis sends in an emailed statement. They still not have received a response to yesterday's offer, they say.
Right. That was the one that they said was no-go or not good enough or something, but we don't know what was in the offer, correct?
We know that what wasn't in the offer was the job security components that the union was looking for, evidently, because with Stellantis' case, there's risks that a number of facilities are going to shut down, and that security for those workers that could be affected is something that they're looking for. In the meantime, though, Joe, we got another, 5,600 workers on strike in in addition to the 13,000 that already were?
Shawn Fain talked about it, the director, of course, of the UAW, in a Facebook Live. Here's a taste.
We're expecting to stand up strike in response to the lack of progress in bargaining with General Motors and Stellantis. We will shut down parts distribution until those two companies come to their senses and come to the table with a serious offer. The members who will join the stand-up strike today are living testament to one of the injustices we are fighting against at the Big Three: tears.
Not getting easier here as we go. And based on what you just said from GM, this could actually get a lot more dicey over the weekend if they're going to start with this tit for tat here. Keith Naughton's been all over this. Bloomberg auto reporter joins us now with the latest from Detroit. Keith, I don't know if you saw this coming here, that GM and Stellantis would be the ones to take the brunt of the expanded strikes. I know Bloomberg was reporting earlier this morning that Ford might be onto something. Could we be in a world where they actually strike a contract deal, a tentative deal with Ford, while they continue striking the other two?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like Ford is making, as the union said, real progress here. One analyst is predicting there could be a settlement at Ford as early as next week. The question is, will the Ford deal set the pattern for the other two, or will GM and Stellantis kind of dig in their heels? Ford has given significant concessions that Wall Street seems to be in favor of. The stock soared today, while GM and Stellantis did not. It includes giving back cost of living adjustments that were taken away in 2009. Making temporary workers immediately full-time. There are a number of sort of good gets for the union in the Ford negotiations that they would like to see come from GM and Stellantis as well.
A new headline just out from Stellantis said they offered all full-time hourly staff $80,000 to $96,000 by contracts. And I guess, Joe, that is referring to the offer they made yesterday that was not responded to. In the case of both Stellantis and GM, though, Keith, it's parts distributors that this strike is now expanding to. All of them. 38 facilities in total, I believe, across 20 states. Can you just talk about why these facilities are important and what not having workers there is going to mean for these two automakers?
Yeah, so with this action, the UAW is literally taking the strike to the streets, because what this will do is interrupt the parts flow that go to dealers for car repairs. So if you take your car in for a repair, the part may not be there, and then you can't drive your car. So this will really test that public support that has weighed very heavily in favor of the union, because this is now going to inconvenience drivers throughout the country and dealers.
Keith, we don't have a sense of what the next deadline might be, do we?
They haven't set another line in the sand yet, since they just crossed today's line. But, the question now becomes, can this progress at Ford, and the fact that Ford was kind of rewarded for it by not having their strike widen beyond the one plant, can that serve as an incentive? It's a carrot and stick approach that the union is using here. Can that serve as an incentive to get GM and Stellantis to come along with what Ford has offered? That's the whole basis of this bargaining strategy. The UAW is trying to pit one company against the other to get the best deal.
It's fascinating. Keith, thank you. Great reporting. Keith Naughton, Bloomberg auto reporter, with us again on Bloomberg Sound On. I look forward to our next conversation. I'm pretty sure we're going to have it as we add the voice now of Arthur Wheaton, the Director of Labor Studies at the Cornell School of Industrial and Labor Relations. Arthur, it's good to have you back on Bloomberg. We've had some pretty important developments here just over the last few hours. What do they tell you about the state of affairs here in these negotiations? Keith says it's pitting automaker against automaker.
Yeah, and it's using a strategy that the automakers have used against the union for years. The term's called whipsawing. So you try to, for decades, General Motors would try to pit one plant against another. If you give us a concession here, we'll give you more work. Now Shawn Fain and the UAW is pitting one automaker against the other automaker, saying the first one to get a decent deal doesn't get a strike. And it's helping them in terms of their strike fund because they're only paying for less than 20,000 UAW members out on strike, yet it's impacting severely both Stellantis and General Motors and their dealerships especially, without draining their strike fund as quickly as it could be.
So definitely some very strategic thinking at play here on the part of Shawn Fain and UAW leadership. I guess the question becomes if they are prepared to just not budge at all on their demands. That seems to be what's happening here, is that the automakers are having to move because the union just isn't doing that. I just wonder how long you think that dynamic is sustainable for.
I think what's likely to happen is both General Motors and Stellantis are waiting for Ford to find the solution for them, so that Ford is most likely to get a deal, and then hopefully that deal will set the pattern at the other two automakers. I think right now they're trying to battle the public relations war at General Motors and Stellantis more so than solve the problems at the bargaining table.
Huh. So Ford's being used by both sides here, Kaylee.
I guess so.
Actually fascinating, and as we watch
taking one for
stock
the team.
Rise. Arthur, if this goes on, maybe there's a deadline next Friday. Maybe they stand up strikes again. Maybe this goes into a third week. Is a lockout among the options for these automakers, or is that signing your own death warrant?
The lockout became an available option the minute the strikes became an available option. So since all three contracts are what they call expired, the no strike, no lockout clause is ended. So they can do it anytime they want. I just don't think they want to. I think right now both GM and Stellantis are sitting back trying to wait and see, waiting for Ford to figure a way out of this, just like they did in Canada for Unifor. Unifor picked Ford as the target because Ford has historically been much better at managing labor relations and valuing that relationship.
So if it's really Ford's deal to make here at the end of the day, is there no role at all for any officials in the administration? We just had a headline coming out of the press briefing with the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre. She said U.S. officials spoke with the UAW and automakers both today. That's, of course, after earlier today, Shawn Fain says, we invite everyone to the picket line, President of the United States included. Does the President of the United States make a difference in a situation like this?
Yes, the president can make a difference, but the biggest difference he can make is not trying to get into the bargaining table. So under the National Labor Relations Act, which is what the private sector is under, there is no role for the president or Congress. Unlike the rail industry, which almost had a strike, the Railway Labor Act does have a specific role for the president, and it was Congress that stopped that strike from happening. It's different in the private sector. The law was written to say the best deal is a gated deal, and they should have both sides work on an issue, try to solve it.
Do you expect, or should there be, Arthur, continued negotiating sessions, or is this going to be, here's my offer, no, I reject that, here's my offer, and we kind of play this out in the media?
So what happens is you can get to what they call last best and final offer, and that's what you could come to at Stellantis or at General Motors. But I don't think we're there yet. I think right now you're seeing an impact, and it's a relatively serious impact, but I don't think anything so far can't be made up by the end of the fourth quarter. So as you have only 3 assembly plants down, they can work overtime and catch up on all of that lost production. And the parts plants doesn't hurt production as much as it hurts the dealerships. And the dealerships are the primary customer for both GM and Stellantis, because GM and Stellantis do not own the dealerships. That is their customer. So I think the pressure right now is adding chaos to the system, but it's also having an impact without costing a huge amount to either the strike fund or gross domestic product in the U.S.
Yeah, that's an interesting point as we think about the economic ramifications of this. When we're talking about cost, though, obviously the cost of the strike fund is the consideration for the union, but the cost of the new contract is the consideration on the other side of the bargaining table for these automakers. The sense I'm getting is that it isn't really so much about the wages. It's about other things related to pensions, for example, some of these higher cost areas. And if that's where the problem is, these companies, a couple of them, have gone bankrupt because of this same issue as before. I wonder how there can really be reconciliation on that issue.
I think there is a huge difference between what you ask for at the table and what you expect to receive. So you never ask for the minimum going into bargaining. You're going to ask for more. I don't think the pensions were solved at Ford. I don't think the healthcare for retirees was solved at Ford. And I don't know if they will be solved. I think those are just two issues. But what the UAW is doing is saying everything we're asking for here, we had for decades. They had a cost of living. They had a defined benefit pension. They had healthcare for the retirees. And those are just some of the things over the years they have given up to help save the companies. So I think it's a reminder. I don't think it's going to be last best and final offer. Give us the pension and the healthcare retiree, or we're all on strike and we'll take you all out right now for forever. I don't think they're at that point.
Wow. You referred to the strike fund already, Arthur. The automakers know how much money the union has, just like we do. Why not just put a date on the calendar for when that money runs out, sit back and wait?
Well, you could try doing that, but the UAW absolutely doesn't want to spend all of that. You got to remember, only 147,000 people are impacted directly by these 3 companies being.
But if you're the automakers, why not just let them spend the money? If you know when that money runs out, doesn't that give the corporations an advantage potentially?
Except that all of your customers are going to start running to Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Kia, and whoever else they want to, and you start losing customers. And at $48,000, the average for each vehicle, it doesn't take many customers to surpass that number in the strike fund. So they could lose a whole lot more money than what the UAW will lose over that period of time.
It's an interesting consideration. And as Arthur's talking about different automakers, there's also Tesla, non-union.
Yeah.
EV maker. EVs are at kind of the heart of the issue in this fight as well. In theory, Tesla's probably feeling pretty good about this right now.
Yeah. We only have 30 seconds, Arthur. Is this whole thing advantage Tesla?
I would say no. I would say what's going to happen is all of this, if the UAW wins huge gains at the bargaining table, you could have the UAW start organizing more of the non-union
Tesla's going to organize.
Including Tesla. And
All
Tesla
right.
is always anti-union and has unfair labor practices against them. So it could be a warning shot saying, look, we're coming to you next. So we want improvements for the workers.
Come back and talk to us. Arthur Wheaton, Cornell University, Director of Labor Studies. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Lawmakers have left us all to ourselves. They're gone for the long weekend without crafting a plan on the budget, and we're going to get to that more immediately here. News from the UAW that you've been hearing about for the last couple of hours on Bloomberg. Remember, we had a 12 noon Eastern, high noon deadline, and you better believe the UAW is scaling up strikes, but not all of them, targeting GM and Stellantis, not Ford. We heard from Shawn Fain, the president of the UAW, just before the deadline.
Today, at noon Eastern Time, all of the parts distribution facilities at General Motors and Stellantis are being called to stand up and strike. We will be striking 38 locations across 20 states, across all 9 regions of the UAW.
But as I mentioned, not Ford. And as we look ahead to the next week here, and in hopes of some sort of a breakthrough, there's going to be an added political element to this as Donald Trump goes to Detroit instead of the Republican debate to speak to members. And this is happening amid calls for President Biden to do the same. He's actually out with a new ad today on all of this. I call it an ad. It's an online video that he just posted on Twitter using the words of Republicans in this case to describe his stand on the union. Give this a taste.
When you have a president that's constantly saying, go union, this is what you get. The unions get emboldened
That's
and then
Nikki
they start
Haley
asking for things.
The first bill he passed had $86 billion for unions.
Senator Tim Scott
This president clearly does prioritize union jobs, and he's made very clear here.
And you've got an anchor here at Fox Business News.
That they're paying.
So you get a taste of this. By the way, he said yes is the one word on the tweet. Mark Niquette is with us, Bloomberg politics and government reporter. Mark, it's wonderful to have you in Washington as we consider the political side to this important, business meets Wall Street kind of story. We add Washington as well, and it's hard to escape the politics as Republicans try to seize the moment. Can they do that? Is Donald Trump onto something next week?
Well, we're going to find out. I mean, it's pretty clear that what President Trump's trying to do is to cut into Biden's union support in Michigan, key swing state in the 2024 election. Biden did very well, beat Trump by about 150,000 votes in 2020. So in addition to counter-programming the GOP debate that's going on in California, I think Trump is sensing an opportunity here that he could make some headway with union members in particular.
It's a pretty friendly crowd, though, right? The rank and file was already kind of leaning toward Republicans and Trump in the last couple of elections here. Is Joe Biden the one who has to win over their support?
Well, there's certainly a disconnect between the union leadership that has historically backed Democrats and the rank and file members. The Democrats would have you believe that it's a majority of the rank and file still support Biden and the Democrats, and sure, there is support on the rank and file for Republicans, but I think that the big question is, does Trump really have the ability to move many of the folks, the union folks who voted for Biden in 2020 and 2024?
You're going to be at this speech, I guess we'll call it, next week in Detroit. He's not expected on the picket line, from what we understand, because of security concerns. Will he be in a union hall, or what? Do we have logistics yet?
Yeah, we're not entirely sure, other than it's a primetime speech with current and former union members, and including not just UAW members, but pipe fitters and other union folks.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the messages from Fain today was, this is not just the big three. This is about more than the big three. And he went through a litany of labor actions in his, I guess, Facebook Live conversation, his live message to members here. This is bigger than the UAW. We just went through UPS. We had rail workers earlier in the year. Is that why Republicans think they have something?
I think so. That and the overwhelming dissatisfaction that voters say they have with the economy and Biden's handling of the economy. Survey after survey shows that he's just not making any headway with his message of Bidenomics, connecting with people. Yeah. And one of the things we're watching to see, I think, is if Biden engages now with this strike in a more personal way. The Facebook video from Fain you mentioned, more or less invited Biden to show up at the picket line and
But he denounced
directly.
Trump's visit, didn't he?
He did, and before the message was, we don't want presidential politics involved in this negotiation. We can do fine without it, thank you.
Yeah.
But there seems to have been a change now where Fain is welcoming Biden to intervene in the strike. So I guess it'll be interesting if we have a sort of a split screen with both Biden and Trump showing up in Michigan to try and make some headway with the strike.
That would be a moment in this campaign. To intervene, though, did you mean to use that word in terms of maybe mediate?
No, not mediate, but intervene in the sense of inserting themselves into the big picture. If not the negotiations directly.
That could still happen, of course. Mark, you're also writing about the impact this may have on the Ohio Senate race. What should we be watching?
Well, we're watching to see what impact this has on Sherrod Brown. He has a tough reelection in Ohio, and historically he's relied on the vote of, in particular, the UAW to carry Ohio. But Ohio has been moving much more to the right in recent elections. A lot of these union folks who forever were Democrats clearly voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020. The big question is, can Sherrod Brown hold these folks, these union voters in particular? If they went for Trump, will they still support Sherrod Brown? So I think the union is looking to Sherrod to, be visibly on their side and help if he can in any way, deliver the gains they're looking for in these negotiations.
We've got a lot to learn here still. It's like every time you turn around, there's another layer on these races, and this UAW is a pretty big layer. Would you join us from Detroit while you're out there next week? I'd love to hear from you. Mark, it's great to have you in Washington. Mark Niquette, Bloomberg Politics government reporter. Many thanks for talking with us, as always, on Sound On. It's not all that often we get an in-person review from Mark Niquette. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington as we prepare to bring in Bill Hoagland now from the Bipartisan Policy Center. We'll bring you up to date on what's happening on Capitol Hill, and by that I mean nothing. They're all gone. Well, I shouldn't say all gone. There's actually a Rules Committee hearing that's taking place that will likely feed into this whole conversation as the House tries to get some single-issue spending bills to the floor next week. But everybody else is out of here. Couldn't get a defense spending bill to even reach debate on the floor of the House. The House and Senate don't see eye to eye. Republicans themselves in the House still do not see eye to eye. And listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene. She posted a video in the gym. She's putting up the gym videos always with the pull-ups, and I guess she had just worked out and she's frustrated.
I'm particularly frustrated today. We went home for August recess. We should have stayed in Washington working to get our appropriation bills done, but we didn't. We went on August recess, and that's when we're supposed to go back to our districts and get work done in our districts. That's what we did. But we should have stayed in Washington and funded the government and gotten all the work done, hammering out the details.
Doesn't sound like she's terribly happy with her ally, Kevin McCarthy, on all of this. Let's turn to Bill Hoagland, as I mentioned, Senior Vice President of the Bipartisan Policy Center, spent more than a day in the Senate working for Bill Frist as the Director of Budget and Appropriations. I won't go through your whole resume, Bill, but it's wonderful to see you here, and thank you for coming. Boy, I remember the conversations we had around the debt limit, the potential default. We thought we had a deal. We're really learning now, apparently we did not. And as everybody heads home, we're going to have, 4 or 5 days potentially to figure this entire thing out next week. You've got some folks described as legislative arsonists who are calling for a shutdown. Speaker McCarthy says he doesn't understand this mentality of just burn the place down. Is that what's happening? Is this caucus going to burn down the House?
Well, they're working on it pretty hard, I think, in terms of causing some real problems for the Speaker. But I remain somewhat optimistic that we're going to be able to work this thing out. If nothing else, focus on the United States Senate next week. The United States Senate on Tuesday will be taking up a piece of legislation called the FAA Reauthorization Bill. Yeah. And not to get into the weeds about this, but it allows them to call that bill up and strip it because it's a revenue bill, because there's revenues in that bill. Allow them to strip out the FAA portion and put in a continuing resolution and then send it over to the House. And so it'll be in the House's job to take up that particular resolution. Right.
So this has been, people are talking about the Senate jamming the House. This would be
Absolutely.
the Senate doing its job.
Yes.
Maybe swooping in at the last minute, but we hear that Kevin McCarthy gets fired if he tries to pass that.
Well, I'm not
continuing
exactly
resolution.
sure that's going to happen.
What
I
do you
mean,
make
he may face a motion to vacate his speakership. I think that's true. But in the last 24, 48 hours, I have been at least hearing that, listen, what's the alternative? And so the way the House works, and I'm a Senate staffer, not a House staffer, so I can't always speak to the procedures in the House.
Yeah.
But the House Democrats could basically not show up to vote on that vacate the position, or they could vote present, and in which case then the Speaker would survive a motion to vacate the office.
So when I ask Democrats here, would you come to the Speaker's defense, and they laugh at me, that's actually what they mean. They would come to his defense without voting for him,
yes.
just by lowering the threshold.
That's exactly right. So I think that's I think from the beginning this has always been a question as to whether or not the Speaker wanted to keep government operational, or did he threaten his own position as a Speaker? And I think this is where it's going to come down to.
Do we in that world end up having like a weekend shutdown or something? Or
well, the good news, of course, is not the good news. The news is that, of course, the fiscal year begins on a Sunday.
That's right.
So it is possible that we would have a shutdown on Sunday, maybe Monday if they're. But I personally, I think that first of all, nobody, Joe, nobody wins in these situations. If people say, well, it's outside the Beltway. We may hear inside the Beltway say we know where the problem is. It's in the House. But outside the Beltway, nobody understands. Basically, we all look bad. And so I think the sooner we get to the position of passing a continuing resolution, the better. Listen, we're not out of the woods here. Even if they do pass a continuing resolution, it'll probably be to the end of October.
Yes,
maybe to think, we'll be going through this again. We're pushing up against snowflakes in December, I think, before we get everything resolved.
Wow. And that's exactly what Kevin McCarthy said he didn't want, right? Don't jam me up against the holidays. He said, let's get it done before then. But that was reality.
That would be nice, but I don't think that's going to happen.
But you also don't think he's going to get fired, which means he might have a little bit more wiggle room than people are illustrating in the media.
I think he's going to try his best to go as far as he can, to push it as far as he can up until he has to. And I think I honestly think he understands. To do this, he has to have Democratic support. And this would be listen, it's 2 against 1. The White House and the Senate, it's 2 against 1. And I've never been in a knife fight, but if it was 2 against 1, I think I'd put my bets on the 2.
Yeah, that's right. Fair enough, even without a knife. So Mitch McConnell wants to see Ukraine funding. President Zelensky was here yesterday. He made the case. Would that CR include it?
Well, that's a good question. As I understand that it probably would there be an attempt to put Ukraine funding in this bill that I'm talking about coming from the Senate. Rand Paul has indicated that he is opposed to that, and so that may delay that's why that may delay getting the bill out of the Senate and over to the House. But at the end of the day, I think there probably will remain. They may want to delay this Ukraine funding until the end of the October to the next round they go through it. But I think at some point here, the Senate is pretty well, majority minority is pretty well in agreement. Besides those few,
that's right.
It's the House that's going to be the problem with the Ukraine funding.
It's been a recurring theme. In our last moment, I just wonder your reflections here when it comes to the dysfunction. Even if we get through this, to your point, we might have another shutdown at the end of the year, and we're going to be wrangling over this for the balance, it seems, of this Congress, aren't we?
Oh, I think so. I think when you have this narrow of a margin in the House, that you're going to have and we move into this political season in a bigger way. It's going to continue on right up into the election time next year. I think this is going to continue on this division. I'm sad about that. I think it is not. It's not the way the government should operate. Of course, I go back to maybe a different time and place on Capitol Hill where we had differences, but we worked out those differences and put the country's best before us.
Well, it's because of your experience in that time and place that we enjoy talking with you, because that's the perspective we need now. Bill Hoagland, the Bipartisan Policy Center. Thanks as always for the insights. I'm Joe Mathieu. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeart Radio app, and the Bloomberg Business app. Or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
a very difficult path ahead for potentially funding the government. We assemble our panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors, as Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, laments those in his own Republican conference who he says want to torch the place. This is the Speaker coming out of a failed vote yesterday to try to begin debate on a defense spending bill.
I don't understand why anybody votes against bringing the idea and having the debate. And then you got all the amendments if you don't like the bill. This is a whole new concept of individuals that just want to burn the whole place down. It doesn't work.
Rick Davis, the Speaker is perplexed. Is he out of control?
Is the Speaker out of control, or is the caucus out of control? I think the Speaker is angry because the caucus is not keeping its deals intact. So I don't blame him. I think this is really outrageous that you have veterans voting against the consideration of the defense appropriations bill. I mean, I've never seen anything like this either in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And it's put the Speaker in a really tight spot. Now they have no idea what to bring up next week. The defense authorization, DHS, agriculture. I mean, he's got to figure out what he's going to do. But I was so glad you had Bill Hoagland on, because he really has the scoop, which is, the Senate's going to hollow out this revenue bill. Only way you can vote on a CR is through a revenue bill, and the only way to do it is the House has to start it. So the House sends them, the FAA reauthorization, and they turn it into the CR. So you're going to have a CR potentially on the floor in the House next week, and one that Democrats will vote on. So the question then is, will McCarthy actually take a vote on that bill? I mean, so the caucus doesn't want to vote on defense, and is McCarthy going to want to vote on a bipartisan CR? It's just going to be really fascinating.
And of course, if the votes on a bipartisan CR, which we're now expecting to come from the Senate, Jeannie, guys like Matt Gaetz are promising a motion to vacate, and they think they can get him fired. The other fear, by the way, if you ask Matt Gaetz, at least, who does not want any part of a stopgap solution here, and I think is girding for a shutdown or encouraging a shutdown, is this discharge petition, the idea that there be a workaround to bring this to the floor by House members. And we actually bleep what he said on the Tim cast about this last evening. Listen to what's worrying Matt Gaetz of Florida.
What the threat is that five liberal or moderate Republicans could just say, we don't want to do the single subject bills. We don't want to go through the pain of doing the cuts to foreign aid or to food stamps or anything like that. So we're just going to go sign what's called a discharge petition and then just move that thing like through a goose.
Like S through a goose, he says, on a microphone in front of a camera, Jeannie. I'm really starting to think it's time to just remake Schoolhouse Rock here. I've been learning more about the legislative process these past couple weeks than I ever imagined. How about you?
Oh, yeah. And I've never heard that S through the goose either. So I'm learning all kinds of things.
I haven't either.
Thank you, Joe. And, it's interesting to listen to Matt Gaetz bemoan the fact that a few lone representatives, maybe as few as 4 or 5, as he says, might hold up the process of regular order. I mean, it is just fascinating to listen to the hypocrisy come from Matt Gaetz. And the reality is, if they wanted to engage in consideration of these bills, they couldn't wait till 8-9 days before the government shuts down to do that, and oppose even a continuing resolution so you could keep the government open and then have these sort of, considerations and sort of something akin to normal order. And I think my biggest fear, because we're listening to Matt Gaetz, so I'm going to add mine. My biggest fear is that we are playing by old rules. We are playing by pre-Trump rules. And I think one thing Democrats have to consider is that whereas these shutdowns have traditionally hurt Republicans, and I think they will continue to, Donald Trump has been pushing for chaos everywhere he can find it. In the House is another place, in Congress. He wants this shutdown because he wants to make the case that under Joe Biden, who he describes as incompetent, the government has resulted in chaos, whether it's the southern border, smash and grabs, crime, and in terms of basic governance like budgeting. So I am really concerned, and I think Democrats should be as well, that this does not just hurt Republicans, but it ends up hurting the Biden administration, the Biden campaign, just as Donald Trump has been pushing for and intended to. And that is new stakes in this game that they're playing.
Rick, I know you're not a big fan of Matt Gaetz. I'll let you speak to that if you want to. But is there an element of what he is saying that actually rings true when it comes to regular order? When he talks about single issue spending bills, does he feel burned by Kevin McCarthy, who promised regular order? Or is this just bad behavior? Sign the CR and keep the government open.
Well, I mean, he's been on the group who have been voting against appropriations bills, which are being brought up in regular order after committees have approved them. And so it is a bit hypocritical that he would then claim that anybody else who would actually try to skirt his influence, by using a different legislative rule. I mean, that's just selfish, right? I mean, of course, if he's going to be along with 5 other Freedom Caucus members obstructing regular order, then people are going to look for other avenues to get their legislation passed.
Do you think Bill Hoagland is right in that Democrats might turn away or not show up for a vote if there was a motion to vacate to, kind of indirectly support Speaker McCarthy?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the Democrats don't want to open this up to potentially, some other much more unattractive speaker candidate, who will try to reorganize the Republican caucus. So, yeah, I mean, they'll just walk off the floor and make it a different kind of vote. And so all of this, I've always thought the easy yes in the negotiation that the speaker had with the right-wing MAGA guys, getting the speaker's job was to give them this option, because the reality is they may try to take the vote, but it's not going to result in his ouster. I mean, there's a difference between taking a vote and actually throwing the speaker out. And in this case, I think there's a zero chance that that if they do it, that Kevin McCarthy doesn't wake up the next day showing how hollow this is for them, right? It only works if they actually never force the vote, right? Because then they have influence. If they vote and they can't get rid of him, then they're dead, right? Then the reality is it was a hollow argument.
How about that? Jeannie, I've got to ask you about the union. The UAW today scaling up these strikes against the big 3. Well, I should be more specific. It's against 2 of the big 3. We had a noon deadline today, as you know. Sean Fain made the announcement before high noon.
We still have serious issues to work through, but we do want to recognize that Ford is showing that they're serious about reaching a deal. At GM and Stellantis, it's a different story.
Different story. Either way, Donald Trump will be there to speak to all of them next week, Jeannie. And now Sean Fain thinks that Joe Biden ought to come speak to union members. Is he right? Does the president head for Detroit?
The president has to walk a fine line. I think he has issued very strong support for the strikers. I think that some of us were surprised by how strong he was in his language. And I, too, was struck, like Bill said, by the fact that Fain just last weekend on CBS Sunday show said, the president, the administration should stay out of it. Now he seems to have changed that. I think in part that may be a response to Donald Trump's decision to go and to speak to workers. But I think we should caution everybody against this idea that workers will naturally line up with Donald Trump. The reality is the workers elected Sean Fain. This is a new UAW under Sean Fain. And if they feel well represented by him, they may follow the leadership, or enough of them may follow the leadership if they choose to endorse Biden, which, of course, they haven't done yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, Donald Trump will be skipping the Republican debate next week, apparently to do that in Detroit. We don't know if the president will join him, but we'll have a lot more with our panel on this next as we look ahead to the debate and new numbers out of New Hampshire today that could be meaningful. We'll talk about it with Rick and Jeannie.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Sean Fain, the president of the UAW, denounced Donald Trump's plan to visit Detroit and talk to the auto workers next week. That's his plan to counter-program the Republican debate. But Sean Fain now says that Joe Biden should come. He's inviting the president to join striking workers on the picket line as they ratchet up the strikes here against GM and Stellantis. That's the update, knowing we had this high noon deadline today. Not good for GM and Stellantis. I guess not worse for Ford, who, as you've been hearing from Charlie Pellet, watching shares rise today because Ford will not get an escalated strike. Let's reassemble the panel for a little bit more on this. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano join Bloomberg Politics contributors. We had Jeannie weigh in first. Rick, I'd like to hear from you on this and whether you think Joe Biden should seize the opportunity here, because we all know Donald Trump is.
Yeah, I think Joe Biden should go to Detroit. He should be talking to the UAW guys. He should not have let Donald Trump get around him. I think it was a pretty sloppy political move by the Democrats to not see that coming. It's a perfect option for Donald Trump. Good excuse to skip the debate to go talk to these guys. And obviously, it's a mixed match of retired and active union members. So he's just putting together an event. It's not really going there to talk to the UAW. And Biden has made a career out of being the pro labor candidate. And so he's got to brandish that credential. There's nothing in it for him to be sort of nice to the corporations at this stage. And why not politically join the right protests and say, I feel for the blue collar workers who are getting abused by the corporations. I mean, to me, this is just a no brainer. I mean, I don't know if it's good public policy, but it's great politics.
Yeah. Well, yeah, imagine the images, Jeannie. I know you think that this is a delicate equation for Joe Biden, but imagine him arm in arm, right, leading the charge. He's got the megaphone in his hand, a fist in the air. Is that not exactly what he needs now?
Well, I'm not sure he needs exactly that, because he's also president of the United States. He's responsible for a stable economy. And striking against the big three can be interpreted by many people as something that is disruptive to the economy at a time when inflation is high. But, I think he does have a difficult line to walk, as anybody does. It's far easier. It's not easy, but easier to run for office and to slam everybody who's in control and power. But somebody like Joe Biden, who is president, has dual responsibilities, multiple, and a big one is to the economy. So, there's that. But I think that he did make a very powerful statement last Friday in support of the union. And the fact that Sean Fain is inviting him to go visit with union workers is testimony to that. I mean, there were some people who heard what the president said last week and said he sounded a bit like Bernie Sanders, maybe with a little less energy, right? His statement was very strong. So, in the piece that you played earlier on in the hour that they put out there, those are Republicans doing this. It is Donald Trump chasing Joe Biden's supporters. Donald Trump is trying to be a friend of the workers that Joe Biden has not just been in the last week for political reasons, but throughout his entire career. So I think that Joe Biden has an upper hand on this, and he has to remember first and foremost his responsibility as president to both the economy and to support the workers. And I think he can do both.
Well, he's got the upper hand in the latest polls out of New Hampshire. These new numbers are from CNN and the University of New Hampshire Survey Center. This is the Granite State poll, a sample of about 2,000 in the Granite State poll. And my goodness, these are hypotheticals for the general election between Joe Biden and every Republican candidate who's going to be on stage next week, plus Donald Trump. Rick, I know you don't have a lot of time for hypotheticals at this stage of the game here, but this is New Hampshire. It's UNH. And when you look at these numbers, my goodness, not good for Donald Trump. Joe Biden beats him by 12. He beats DeSantis by 17, same as Ramaswamy. Beats Haley by 16, Pence by 29, Christie by 24, and Scott by 13. What do these numbers tell you?
Yeah, well, I think you focus in on the Biden-Trump matchup because they've run against each other in New Hampshire. There are a lot of Republicans who think New Hampshire is a swing state. And I think that it's a legitimate poll at that stage. I mean, the rest of them don't have enough name ID and haven't campaigned enough. So it's very hard to make comparisons. But this Trump number is bad because everything that Biden's getting is motivated by Trump. The intensity that Biden's voters give him is because they don't want Trump to be president. Not that they want him to be president. They don't want Trump. Trump's negatives are really what's driving his numbers down. I mean, up over 60% negatives. I mean, he's only getting a little over 70% of his own ballot. I mean, he is a broken candidate in New Hampshire. And unless he changes himself, he's got no way to compete in New Hampshire.
And he beats everyone by more than that, Jeannie. The Biden camp has been in need of some good news. Is this it?
Yeah, this is absolutely good news for the Biden camp. And I think they are paying close attention to these polls because we heard the president speaking to funders and supporters in New York, and he is really turning his focus on Donald Trump to keep pushing these negatives up. And his argument is that Donald Trump wants to destroy democracy. He wants to increase the chaos and decrease any sense of normalcy and proper governance in a democracy. And that seems to be resonating with voters who are listening in places like New Hampshire. And this is one of the striking things about these early state polls. Donald Trump's support is down about 15% in these early state polls versus the national polls. And that's presumably because these voters are paying close attention. And the voters who are doing that are really not happy with what they're hearing from Donald Trump. And in New Hampshire in particular, about a third of Trump supporters said they would look elsewhere. So that puts his floor down about 25%. Bad news for Donald Trump, good news for Joe Biden in these head-to-heads. And they've got to keep making the case that you may not love Joe Biden, but look at the alternative.
Well, I'll tell you, a couple of weeks ago, we would have been obsessing over this DeSantis number as well. Remember when DeSantis was the big fear? He's the one who actually could beat Joe Biden in a general. He loses by 17 points in New Hampshire, according to this poll. Some final thoughts next from Rick and Jeannie. I'm Joe Mathieu. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We hear a lot about crime in major cities these days. And in New York, they've got a new tool to help the police. They rolled it out today, unveiled this today. It's called K5, a drone. Mayor Eric Adams helped to unveil this piece of drone technology that'll help patrol New York's busiest subway stations. Yes, New York now has a RoboCop.
This is a good investment in taxpayers' dollars. And I'm hoping you're going to put a line in your story how cost efficient I am, because I should get that. This is below minimum wage. You know, no bathroom breaks, no meal breaks.
No bathroom breaks, no mirror breaks, but ready to deliver justice.
Drop it. Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
That's right. It is now our reality, ladies and gentlemen. RoboCop is among us. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. I'm going to have to think twice, I guess, when I go to New York. Jeannie, you're a New Yorker. There's going to be a cop walking along with the RoboCop. Does this bring justice to New York's subways?
Well, I certainly hope so, but I have to tell you, I shop at Stop and Shop sometime, and they have Murdy the robot, who's eerily similar to this right. K5 robot, and he always freaks me out. So I don't know if I'm going to feel safe or more freaked out. And $9 an hour, they get to lease him. He should at least be paid more per hour. That's not even minimum wage.
You make that sound like a deterrent, Rick. I don't know about you. If you saw one of these things coming your way, would you turn and run? I feel like there's enough to worry about already in New York.
Yeah, I'm anti-RoboCop because you know what that leads to? Robo-thief. No. I mean, like, what? I mean, like, is this an escalation thing? I mean, like, you know, the police get a robo, the cops or the criminals get a robo. I mean, like, we're all going to be like just staying in our homes while the robos fight it out on the street. I mean, I'm not sure progress is a good thing.
Leave it to Rick and Jeannie to help us get to the bottom of this. Absolutely, yes. K5. It needs a friendlier name. By the way, it's taking pictures and video of you, but not audio, and no facial recognition. I think turn and run is going to be the answer for me. Thanks for listening to the Sound On podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at 1 p.m. Eastern Time at Bloomberg.com.